We've been discussing themes in Aristotle's ethics. And one of the central ideas in Aristotle's ethics is that people do what they do because they're after a certain goal. And people are very different, they have different personalities, and they do different things. But Aristotle's thesis, his idea, is that people are pursuing the same thing. And what they're pursuing is eudaimonia, which is often translated as happiness, or a sense of personal flourishing, or contentedness of soul, something like that. And so Aristotle puts it this way: what is the good for the sake of which everything else is done? Why do people do what they do? And Aristotle says happiness is thought to be just such an end, because we choose it for itself. Happiness is something perfect, the end to which our actions are directed. So Aristotle's thesis is that people do what they do because they want to be happy. They want to have some sense of contentment. They want to have some sense of personal flourishing. And so people bowl, and they become fighter jet pilots, and they read, and they volunteer at soup kitchens, and they work on cars, and they learn other languages, and they work in the garden, and they join choirs and sing in choirs. Aristotle says they do all of these very different things because they're after happiness, right? Now, it may be that the particular book I'm reading right now is not so interesting. I have to read this book for a class, and I don't particularly find it interesting. But I'm still doing that because there's some goal I'm after. I want to get a college degree. I want to learn about, a new subject, something like that. There's some goal I have, and I think if I reach that goal, then that will help to bring me a sense of eudaimonia. So Aristotle's point isn't that everything we do makes us feel good, but that we do what we do because we have the goal of experiencing eudaimonia, happiness, right? So learning a language can be hard, and practicing a new language can be hard because you make mistakes, and you feel self-conscious when you can't think of the word, or when you have a conversation with somebody and then you realize that you used the wrong verb and things like that. So it can be tough, it can be challenging, but we do these kinds of things because there's some goal we're after, right? Becoming a fighter jet pilot is very hard, right? It involves a lot of hard work. But we're after a goal. And this is Aristotle's idea. Now, Aristotle says that a lot of people are after this goal, but they get it wrong. So, for example, people will garden because they're after the sense of eudaimonia. Aristotle's idea is that's the same reason they'll join gangs. That's the same reason they'll rob banks. That's the same reason they will squander all of their wealth on gambling, right? And here we're not talking about, a casual evening at the casino. We're talking about, doing something that's really harmful to a person's life. These things are obviously damaging, obviously harmful, but why do people do them? Well, the bank robber robs the bank because he wants money, and he thinks if he has that money, then that will bring him a sense of eudaimonia. Or you join a gang because you're looking for security, or you're looking for status, and you think if you get that security, if you get that status, then you'll have some sense of eudaimonia. And Aristotle says, of course, these folks are getting it wrong. And there are many, many ways to go wrong. There are fewer ways to go right. But fundamentally, what's driving everybody, Aristotle says, is the desire to experience eudaimonia, happiness, a sense of contentedness, a sense of personal flourishing. Right? Now, some folks do a pretty good job at this, and this is a person we discussed before, the person of good character who judges every situation rightly. Well, as we said in the previous discussion, judging every situation rightly, that would be an extremely rare person. But I think most of us can get to a place where we judge most situations rightly, where we judge a lot of situations rightly. We practice. We practice our responses. We practice interpreting situations. We work on those skills involved in getting life situations right. But then there's another sort of person who doesn't take care. This is a person who sort of stumbles through life, who doesn't think about it, right? Who may have, interesting experiences, who may experience fun, who may experience entertainment, right? But this kind of person who doesn't take care, Aristotle's idea is this person is chasing eudaimonia, but is unlikely to experience it. Now let's do a quick exercise here. So let's say that you're going to go on a cruise for 3 weeks, right? And you're going to have a cabin mate, so you don't have a choice. You're going to have a cabin mate, and all you know about the 2 cabin mates, one of whom will be your cabin mate, all you know about them is what we have written right here. So one of the people who might be your cabin mate is a person of good character who judges every situation rightly. Okay, that's option number 1. Option number 2 is a sort of person who doesn't take care, right? So you'll spend 3 weeks on this cruise ship, and one of the 2 will be your cabin mate. Which will you choose? And I think that most people would choose, if they're going to have a cabin mate for 3 weeks on a cruise liner, I imagine most people would go with the person of good character. Because even though this information, it doesn't tell us much, one of the things it does tell us is that the trip is less likely to involve conflict if we go with the person described in option number 1. Or if there is conflict, it probably won't be to the same extent as if we go with number 2. If we go with option number 1, a better chance that this person will keep his or her stuff orderly, right, in the cabin. Less of a chance of that with number 2. So number 1 brings better feelings anyway. I think, a lot of folks, their first choice would be not to have a cabin mate, someone that they don't know before leaving on the cruise. But if that's option's not available and you have to choose, then option 1 makes us feel better, right, than option 2. And that gets us to another theme in Aristotle's book. Aristotle talks about pleasures and pains. He talks about joy and grief. So let's look at this. He says, it is with pleasures and pains that moral goodness is concerned, right? Things that we find pleasant in life, things that we find difficult and repulsive in life. And the person who gets life right, this person of good character who judges every situation rightly, this is the person who gets these things right. That things that should cause us, things that should bring pleasure, do, and things that should bring pain do bring pain. Hence the importance, as Plato says, and remember Plato is Aristotle's teacher, hence the importance, as Plato says, of having been trained in some way from infancy to feel joy and grief at the right things. True education is precisely this. Well, that's an interesting sentence. True education, the heart of education, is knowing what should cause us joy and what should cause us grief, right? And sometimes I've asked my students when they applied to go to universities, did they read on any university brochure, you should come to this university because here we will focus on what should cause us joy and what should cause us grief, right? Aristotle says that is the very heart of education. What should cause us joy and what should cause us grief? Words that are similar to joy, gladness, cheer, satisfaction, happiness. Words that are similar to grief, sorrow, sadness, regret, anguish, right? And then we remember some of the virtues that Aristotle discusses. Courage, and in previous discussions we looked at Gilgamesh challenging Humbaba in the cedar forest. We looked at the story of Daniel in the threat of the lion's den. We looked at the story, or we just briefly mentioned the story of Antigone, sort of the core idea at the heart of this play by Sophocles, Antigone. We looked at the case of Socrates. And in each case, we saw courage. And courage is something that should bring us joy. Recklessness, that should probably be something that doesn't so much cause us joy. Cowardice, that should not cause us joy. Maybe that should cause us grief. But real courage should cause us joy. Temperance, that is moderation, should cause us joy, I think Aristotle would say. And here St. Paul would agree. Here's a line from St. Paul. Let your gentle spirit, to expand on that a little bit, your graciousness, your unselfishness, your mercy, your tolerance, your patience, be known to all people, right? Now, St. Paul was a tough guy. He was a courageous guy, right? And if you read, the information we have about Paul in those early Christian writings that we call the New Testament, no one's going to say this guy is wimpy. No one's going to say he's not strong. But Paul is saying, hey, let's be people of moderation. Let's be people of grace. Let's be unselfish. Let's be merciful. Let's be tolerant. Let's be patient, right? And people who get that right, well, that's a cause for joy. People who are ambitious in the right way. If somebody's not ambitious at all, somebody has no ambition at all, well, then maybe that's something to feel bad about. Or if somebody has kind of the bad kind of ambition, look at me, I'm awesome, I want to be awesome, I want to be recognized, I want status. Well, that's something probably we should feel sad about too. But, something to rejoice at is someone who is ambitious for the right reasons. I want to do something useful in the world. I want to do something good in the world. I want to do something helpful in the world. And in order to do these things, then I have to study, I have to exercise, I have to work, I have to, form certain skills, right? So proper ambition, that's something to rejoice at. Truthfulness, not the person who's giving us too much information, right? But the person who gets it right, that person of character who judges the situation correctly. You're just walking by someone in the hall and the person says, how are you? In that context, we're supposed to say, okay, fine, thank you, right? That person's not asking us to stop in the hall and to share all the details of the difficulties of the past few days, right? And of course, falsehood, people who can't be trusted because they're not truthful, that's something to grieve over, to use Aristotle's word. People who are witty, that is, of good humor. Now, some people will be more inclined this way than others, but no one is impressed by someone who is humorless, who is absolutely humorless. On the other hand, there's a person who seems not to know, when to reel it in, right? Sort of endlessly, what's the right word? Just sort of the comic without end, right? The comedian without end, right? I mean, the person who gets it right, who understands, when the moment is to be witty and when it isn't, right? And we appreciate that when people can get that right. Righteous indignation. If there's something to be angry about, remember, here's the theme we discussed in Aristotle before. Aristotle brings up the topic of anger. And of course, there are reasons to be angry, but getting that right. And, here we might look again at the case of Antigone, right? Who, the law goes out from King Creon that the body of Polynices cannot have burial rites exercised over it, and Antigone says, but the law of Zeus says otherwise, and she has a sense of righteous indignation, right? Well, that's something, if a person gets that right, then that's something that we admire. It's something that we rejoice in. Other things, to review what we saw from ancient Mesopotamia. Remember this law from Hammurabi: if a builder build a house for someone and does not construct it properly, and the house which he built fall in and kill its owner, then that builder shall be put to death. Well, I think most of us would agree that the consequences are a little harsh, right? The death penalty. But, if you look at the photo below, if that porch or that deck collapsed because of incompetent work, then that's something, to use Aristotle's word, that I think we should grieve over. Because, one reason is it costs the people in the home, more time and trouble, right? But also, if a society has a lot of people who don't pay attention to the quality of the work they do, then that is a cause for grief, right? But what if a society has many, many more people who want to do a good job, right? And who are attentive and who want to deliver. They're being paid to deliver some service, and they want to do that well. Well, in Aristotle's words, that's something that should cause us joy. Or remember this from ancient Egypt, right? The negative confession. You die and your heart is weighed on one side of the scale and ma is put on the other side of the scale, and how have we done? And one of the things you say in the negative confession is that I have not pried into matters. I have minded my own business. I have not put my nose into other people's business, right? Well, I think, sometimes other people's business is our business, but most of the time it's not. And most of the time there is a certain, it's wise to understand boundaries, right? And to not try to dig into other people's personal business. And I think most of the time we appreciate people who don't dig into other people's business. If folks are continually looking for information about other people that they can then gossip about, well, that's maybe something, to use Aristotle's word, that should cause grief. But if, on the other hand, we have a person who understands, look, I don't want people digging into my business, I'm not going to dig into their business, well, that's something that can cause joy. I just almost randomly pulled Proverbs out of the Hebrew book of Proverbs, from this ancient Hebrew writing. He who gathers crops in summer is a prudent son, but he who sleeps during harvest is a disgraceful son. Gathering crops in summer is a prudent son. Getting things done, meeting your obligations, contributing to others, right? Contributing to society. And doing all of this in an honorable and respectable way, this should cause joy, right? But not keeping your obligations, not remembering that you're a member of a community. This kind of stuff should cause grief, right? Or here we go, another proverb. The greedy bring ruin to their households, but the one who hates bribes will live. Bribes, that points to corruption, right? That points to corruption. So it's never happened to me that a student has never come to me and said, hey, right now my grade is a C, I'll give you $100 if you give me a B+. That's never happened to me, right? But it does happen in other places, right? Or the police officer, I've been pulled over a few times in my life, the police officer pulls me over, right? And I've never offered the police officer $50 to let me go. Right? But that does happen in a lot of other countries. And that kind of corruption can tear a society apart. So we should rejoice if we look at our society and we say, well, inevitably there are some problems because human beings are here and human beings are complicated. But on the whole, this is not a corrupt society. If that's the conclusion we have, then that's something to rejoice in. If, on the other hand, our conclusion is the opposite, that we're not really sure we can trust the education system, we're not sure we can trust the police, we're not sure we can trust the courts, if that's the conclusion someone comes to, then that's a cause for grief. And Aristotle's point is that all of these things we want to get right. What should cause us joy and what should cause us grief? Here's another proverb from the Hebrew book of Proverbs. Discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death. In other words, help your children along, right? I mean, no 2-year-old knows how to get along in the world, but somewhere between the age of 2 and 20, it's the job of adults to help that person get ready for the real world, to be educated, to form good habits, etc. And if adults do that well, then that's something to rejoice in. But what if adults indicate that they don't care, that the young people really don't get educated? They don't get educated in mind, they don't get educated in soul. Then, according to this proverb, that makes the adults a willing party to the death of those young people. That's a terrible thing. That's a terrible thing. That should cause us grief. And so we look again at the quote, it is with pleasures and pains that moral goodness is concerned. Hence the importance, as Plato says, of having been trained in some way from infancy to feel joy and grief at the right things. True education is precisely this. This is the core of education. I love this idea from Aristotle. And we want to think about this not only in the abstract, sort of like, what are things, just thinking of examples as we've just done, what are things that should cause me grief and joy? But we want to bring it home to ourselves, right? We want to bring these things home to ourselves. How should I live? What kind of work do I need to do so that I can contribute to the sense of joy that people can have in this society? I don't want to be a person who contributes more to the grief that people will feel in this society. We want to bring this home to ourselves, right? We want to bring this home to ourselves. We want to make it relevant to ourselves. And so Aristotle says we have to apply our minds to the problem of how our actions should be performed. There's no magic here. There's no magic. This is work. This is work. But it's work that matters, and it's work that pays off, right? Aristotle says that a virtuous life requires exertion. There it is again. Work. Virtue lies in our power, and so does vice. And Aristotle's idea is we are the person that we make ourselves into. We are the person that we make ourselves into. That's a key idea of this book by Aristotle. Now, when we were earlier in the discussion, we looked at these things that people can do as they're chasing eudaimonia, bowling, becoming a fighter jet pilot, singing in a choir, learning a language, being an auto mechanic. These are things that may be difficult, but on the whole they're enjoyable, which is why we're after them. Or, maybe we don't particularly enjoy these things, but these things help us get to another goal, which we think will bring to us eudaimonia, right? And so that's fairly easy to understand why we would do these things, right? But what about when things aren't enjoyable? What about when we need to do something and we have a sense that here's something that I need to do, right? Or here's a stand I have to take, or here's something I need to engage in. But there isn't any sense of enjoyment here. So we're not talking about robbing a bank. We're talking about something that's noble, that's principled, that's honorable, right? And you have a sense that this is what I need to do, but there is no sense of enjoyment that comes with it. Well then, how does this fit with Aristotle's thesis that everybody, what's driving people ultimately is this desire for eudaimonia, this desire for happiness, this desire for a sense of personal flourishing. And if you look in the face of that person there, you don't get the feeling that he's enjoying what's going on right now. And that's an image from a movie we're going to look at in the next video, some clips. So let's finish up looking at these lines from early Christian writings, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5. And Jesus is recorded as saying, "Blessed are those who mourn, blessed are those who are persecuted." And the word blessed in the Greek is makarios, and makarios is quite similar to eudaimonia, right? Makarios and eudaimonia, very, very close, right, in their meaning. And so this seems kind of weird. Happy are those who mourn? Well, that seems kind of contradictory. Happy are those who are persecuted? That seems kind of weird, right? And so that's where the conversation is going to go now. What happens when we need to do things and we have a sense that this is what we need to do, but it really isn't enjoyable? It might actually cause some mourning. It might actually bring on us some persecution. Well, how does that fit with Aristotle's thesis that everyone is chasing eudaimonia? And that's where we're going to go in the next discussion.